Lens Protocol launched with a promise: user-owned social profiles, composable creator tools, and a new social stack built for Web3. Now, 3 years plus in, the community is asking a single blunt question: what the fuck is going on, Lens? Before we find out, did you know that 60% of you listening are not following? Come on, guys, hit that follow button and collect our episodes on pods.media. Thanks, everyone. Today's mission is laser-focused. We're dissecting what seems to have gone seriously wrong inside one of the most, promising experiments in decentralized social media. We're diving into the community's sources, the forum posts, the articles, the critiques that have been bubbling up. We're breaking down the accusations, looking at the facts on the ground in the Lens Protocol ecosystem, really trying to understand this current crisis and, maybe more importantly, what needs to happen next. Because when Lens first launched, it wasn't just promising. It felt pretty revolutionary, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The energy was huge.
The original vision, it wasn't just about building another feed, another Twitter clone. It was supposed to be this foundational layer.
Exactly, a new social stack.
Right, this dream of an open, permissionless social world where you, the user, actually owned your identity, your content. Your profile was an NFT. Your posts were these composable data bits. And the idea was dozens of different apps, different interfaces, could all plug into this one shared social graph. That was the big promise.
And it was a powerful promise. That foundation, like you said, it felt really strong. What's so, I think, frustrating for the community now, the loyal ones anyway, is watching the structure built on top just seemingly crumble.
Crumble how? What's the core issue?
It looks like fundamentally an organizational failure. It's become this classic knowledge gap, a trust issue. You've got the core community, the early adopters, the builders, the creators who stuck around. They were promised a voice, right? A stake in this decentralized thing.
Ownership.
But instead of getting transparency, roadmaps, clear communication, they're getting silence or, these vague non-answers. And maybe worst of all, they're hearing whispers or even seeing evidence of core team members kind of packing up and moving on.
Feeling that atmosphere. You can almost taste it in the sources we looked at.
Yeah.
They described the current situation not just as quiet, but defined by actively missing roadmaps, communication that's sporadic, maybe a bit defensive when it does happen.
Yeah, definitely defensive sometimes.
And just this deep, pervasive feeling of abandonment. It's a strong word, but it comes up again and again.
It does. And look, in Web3, when a high-profile project goes dark like this, what's the immediate assumption?
That something's broken, where someone's left.
Exactly. That the people running it have either failed or they've just moved on to the next shiny thing.
Yeah.
And that's the crisis of confidence the Lens community is really wrestling with right now.
Really creates an existential question, doesn't it? If the core team, the stewards of the protocol's health, aren't talking, what are you supposed to be loyal to? The code, the idea, or the people who seem to be letting it stagnate?
That's the heart of it. What does loyalty even mean in that context?
Okay, let's really unpack this feeling of abandonment. It's not just vibes, right? The sources point to actual, tangible evidence that things have slowed way down. Use this metaphor, the trimming of the garden.
Yeah, I thought that was a really apt analogy. It perfectly captures what's happened. If you rewind, say, 12, maybe 18 months, the Lens ecosystem felt vibrant. It was almost chaotic, but in a good way.
Like things were actually happening.
Right. You had dozens of new apps launching, trying things out, competing, integrating with each other, leveraging that composability promise. It felt like a genuine digital city sprouting up. Now, you look at the list of active projects, and the landscape is lean, decidedly lean. The big names, the flagship apps that really drove daily use, the ones that made Lens exciting and gave people a reason to log in every day.
What happened?
Many haven't just slowed down development. They've either completely migrated to other platforms, put their Lens integration on indefinite pause, or just vanished. No updates, no activity, gone from the list of projects getting any meaningful attention.
And if we try to quantify that loss, we're not talking about a small dip.
No, it's a severe contraction. The sources are really clear on this. The ecosystem has shrunk from dozens and dozens of active contributing projects down to maybe fewer than a handful, fewer than 5 that are actually driving any significant sustained transaction volume or unique user activity.
And for a social platform, that's deadly, isn't it? You can't get those network effects, that critical mass you need for social media to work if the actual developers building the experiences are packing their bags.
It's a negative feedback loop. Fewer apps mean fewer users mean less incentive for developers, and so on.
Okay, so here's where, according to the sources, this organizational mess really turns into something that feels like a betrayal to the community. The team fragmentation combined with this looming migration threat.
Yes, this is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, quite damaging. The whispers about internal shifts, about people leaving, those have basically solidified into accepted community knowledge now.
It's the critical issue they point to.
The big one is that original Lens team members, key contributors, people with deep knowledge of the protocol, they are moving their focus, their energy, their expertise somewhere else.
Where?
Specifically, the sources point towards projects being built around the base chain.
Okay, so that shift Lens primarily operating on Polygon and Ethereum Layer 2, and key talent moving towards Base, another L2 backed by Coinbase.
That's not just a technical footnote, is it?
Not at all. It signals a pretty significant shift in, let's call it, allegiance, or at least focus. Why Base? What's the pull? Why would that cause such a talent drain from Lens?
Well, there's a mix of factors, probably. Some rational business logic, some powerful market momentum. Look, Lens was built on this permissionless ethos, right? Anyone can build. But the reality is, Base, being backed by Coinbase, offers some pretty compelling advantages that maybe address some friction points Lens was hitting.
Like what?
Think about it. Potentially lower gas fees, especially for the kind of high-volume, low-value transactions you see in social media. Maybe a perception of a cleaner, smoother L2 scaling solution. And crucially, alignment with significant institutional capital and infrastructure via Coinbase.
And isn't there a connection to Elv as well? Lens's parent company is tied to Elv, and Base have strong ties there too.
Exactly. There's a strong ecosystem alignment. So while it feels like a gut punch to the loyal Lens community for the talent involved, moving towards Base might look like a more rational, lower friction path to achieving Web3 adoption at scale. It follows the gravity, perhaps.
So even if it's technically rational for the individuals, when core staff, the architects who understand the system deeply, take that knowledge and energy to what's effectively a competing ecosystem, the protocol they leave behind inevitably starts to suffer.
It decays. That's
Right.
the word. And it absolutely reinforces that perception of betrayal you mentioned earlier.
How so?
The sources really hammer this point. This internal movement creates a damaging community perception. The feeling is that even the people inside the Lens organization, the core team itself, aren't actively using Lens day to day anymore.
Which for a social protocol.
It's devastating, especially a Web3 social protocol that's built on ideas of authenticity, dogfooding, shared ownership. If the architects aren't willing to live in the house they built, why should anyone else stick around? It feels hypocritical.
And it immediately makes you ask, where are the internal resources really going? If the team isn't focused here, why should external builders keep investing their time and effort into a system that feels like it's being mentally abandoned by its own leadership?
Precisely. It kills external motivation.
And all of this whole mess, is just amplified by this critical lack of transparency we talked about. The sources are pretty blunt about the communication style or lack thereof.
Lack thereof is probably more accurate. Public updates aren't just rare, they're almost non-existent sometimes.
And when they do happen,
Often vague. Boilerplate stuff, The classic, we are working hard behind the scenes, or exciting things are coming soon.
standard corporate speak.
Exactly. And after years of people being invested, putting their time in, the community finds these cozy PR lines, as one source put it, frankly insulting. They don't want vague promises anymore.
What do they want?
Clarity, specificity, honesty. They want that published roadmap. They want accountability for the treasury. Where's the money? How's it being used? And they want a clear, transparent path towards the governance structure they were promised, which means setting up a proper DAO.
Because without that basic transparency,
The trust deficit just gets wider and wider, and the community naturally assumes the worst. They assume the silence means there's nothing good to say.
Okay, let's dig into the specifics then. What exactly has stopped working that's led to this contraction? The sources seem to agree the root problem is this dev and creator exodus.
Yeah, it's existential, really. It hits both the utility of the platform and its cultural relevance. Great builders left, maybe because the tooling wasn't keeping up, the support wasn't there, or the technical direction just seemed fuzzy, unclear.
And the creators.
Great creators left because, well, the audience shrank. If fewer people are using the apps, your content reaches fewer eyes, it's less valuable, the platform becomes less relevant for discovery or engagement.
So it's that feedback loop again.
It is. That's the absolute root cause of the shrinking app ecosystem. A social protocol can't just survive on cool tech infrastructure alone. It needs people using it, creating stuff, driving activity. When that driving force, the builders and the creators, starts heading for the exits, the contraction becomes inevitable, and it feeds on itself.
But the community isn't just, throwing their hands up and leaving.
Yeah.
The ones who were still there, they seem to be organizing. They've actually put together a pretty specific wish list of demands, haven't they? It's like they're telling the Lens team how to fix their own business.
Basically are. And the specificity of these demands really shows you the level of seriousness. And frankly, the operational intelligence within that remaining community. They know what needs to be done.
What's top of the list?
First and foremost, fundamental business clarity. They demand an honest, published roadmap. Not just promises, but actual milestones, timelines, where are we going? Second, clarity on the treasury plan. Where are the funds? How are they allocated? Who's accountable? Basic financial transparency.
And the governance piece, the DAO.
That's the third major demand. A clear path to meaningful governance. Setting up that DAO structure they've talked about for so long. The community feels, and you can see their point, that if the core team isn't going to lead effectively, they need to empower the community to take the wheel. Now,
Makes sense. What else?
finally, they need specific details on developer support, dedicated support, because without really robust tooling, clear documentation, accessible guidance, new projects just won't get off the ground. Or they'll fizzle out. You need to support the builders.
Okay, if we zoom out again, connect this back to the bigger picture, it feels important to acknowledge the one thing that is still visibly working. The sources consistently mention one positive sign, one area of activity keeping a pulse going.
Yeah, and it's important to give credit where it's due. The GHO rewards system, Lens, did successfully implement this token rewards mechanism.
Explain that quickly.
Sure, it basically distributes GHO, which is a stablecoin linked to the Aave ecosystem, to top users every week. The distribution is based on engagement metrics, posting, commenting, that sort of thing.
And the community sees this as a positive.
The sources acknowledge it was a significant technical achievement to get it working reliably. And crucially, it did provide a necessary pulse of activity, as one source called it. It kept a certain segment, the high engagement, loyal users, active on the platform. It generated some transaction volume, some visible life signs.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There's a huge but. And this is the core critique the sources level against relying on it too heavily. A rewards engine by itself does absolutely nothing to fix the deep strategic problems the protocol is facing.
It's like a short-term fix masking a long-term decline.
Exactly. It's a retention tactic pretending to be a growth strategy. Think of the GHO rewards like putting a patient on life support. It keeps the heart beating, technically, but it does zero to treat the actual disease.
And the disease here is the lack of roadmap, trust, developer support.
All of that. Weekly token drops are great for boosting short-term metrics. They get people logging in, clicking buttons, making transactions. Fine. But they fundamentally cannot replace a missing strategic vision. They don't rebuild broken trust, and they don't provide the kind of sophisticated hands-on developer support you need for the ecosystem to actually grow and diversify beyond just those few main apps.
So the risk is the platform just becomes about farming the token.
That's the fear. If the only compelling reason people are using the platform is to qualify for the next GHO drop, then it's not really a social utility anymore. It's just a weekly lottery. And that's not a sustainable model for long-term value or relevance.
Let's dig a bit more into that failure of developer support, because the sources mentioned something specific, collapsing the LIP process. What's an LIP and why is its failure such a big deal?
Right. The LIP, or Lens Improvement Proposal, this is, a pretty standard mechanism in Web3 for how decentralized projects handle code contributions and protocol upgrades.
Like an open source governance system.
Basically, yeah. Developers from the community can propose changes, suggest new features, point out bugs, recommend fixes to the core protocol. They write up a proposal, the community discusses it, maybe votes on it, and if it's approved, the core team, or whoever manages the code base, integrates it. The whole idea is that the community, not just the internal team, can drive the evolution of the product.
And the sources are saying this process is broken.
Dormant.
Critically stalled is how I'd describe it, based on the sources. And the failure to actively manage and, importantly, incentivize the LIP process is seen as a huge bottleneck. It basically halts that decentralized development momentum in its tracks.
How so?
Well, if you're an external builder and you submit a proposal for a critical feature or a much-needed bug fix, and it just sits there for weeks or months with no review, no feedback, no path to integration, what are you going to do?
Stop contributing, probably. Move on to something else. Exactly. You just stop bothering. And what that does is it forces all the development burden right back onto the core team, the same core team that's already perceived as fragmented and potentially distracted. It creates this dependency bottleneck that Lens, with its open source composable vision, was explicitly designed to avoid.
So the community demand isn't just to restart it, but to incentivize it.
Yes. Relaunch the LIP process, but attach clear, potentially financial incentives to contributions. Make it worthwhile for developers to spend their time improving the protocol. Ensure good proposals get reviewed, prioritized, and integrated. Otherwise, it's just an empty gesture.
Okay, so the overall community mood seems to be shifting. It's moving beyond just being frustrated and asking for things towards actively organizing and demanding specific changes. They're not just complaining anymore.
No, they're getting strategic. And the maturity of this core community really shines through here, I think. Look at the specificity of what they're asking for. They're not just saying, communicate better.
What are they asking for specifically on communication?
They are specifically demanding a dedicated communications and growth team, meaning actual hires, full-time people whose job it is to run weekly updates, manage the social media channels consistently, host open community calls where people can actually ask questions and get answers. They want a visible, accountable face managing the public conversation, not just, a few random tweets from a developer's personal account.
And the incentive structure, the GHO rewards, they want that changed too.
Fundamentally overhauled. The critique is pretty sharp. The current system feels like a weekly lottery, as one source put it. It encourages quantity of low-value interactions over quality contributions, and it rewards users who can maybe game the system for engagement, rather than the developers building valuable tools or infrastructure.
So what's the proposed fix?
The demand is to separate the rewards, create distinct incentive pools. One pool specifically for builders, people contributing code, tools, essential infrastructure, and another pool maybe for creators and general user engagement. Make the incentives targeted, make them sustainable.
Rewarding content farming while neglecting infrastructure.
It's a recipe for disaster. You can't build a lasting Web3 platform that way. You just end up with potentially a ghost town built on lottery tickets while the underlying foundations crumble.
And beyond these bigger strategic fixes comes incentives. The more technical or operationally minded people in the community are pushing for very practical nuts and bolts infrastructure improvements too, right?
Yeah, they're basically trying to step in and fill the operational vacuum they perceive the core team has left. Things like establish a regular weekly public update cadence. Make transparency a process, not just a one-off announcement when things get bad.
What else?
They're demanding a dedicated, urgent channel specifically for handling outages and technical issues. Downtime happens in Web3, things break. That's almost expected. But silence from the team during an outage, that's what destroys user trust. It signals that the operational team is either absent, overwhelmed, or just doesn't feel accountable to the users when things go wrong.
And they're also pushing for more transparency around the protocol's treasury, mentioning things like staking or AV integration.
Right. They want more insight into the capital reserves. Where is the money held? Is it safe? But more importantly, is it being used productively? Or is it just sitting there dormant while the core team seems to be fragmenting and the protocol is stagnating? They want assurance the resources are being managed responsibly.
It feels like the overall message boiling up from all these demands is pretty blunt.
Very blunt. One source synthesized it perfectly. People want solutions, not salt. They're tired of perceived excuses or negativity. They demand either a renewed commitment from the leadership or a clear, structured plan for transition. But this continued strategy of silence, of being left in the dark, that's increasingly viewed as an act of bad faith. It's just not acceptable anymore to the core believers.
Which leads us to maybe the most critical question. How far are they actually willing to push to get an answer? The sources mentioned the community isn't just talking anymore, they're organizing their leverage. There's talk of a potential nuclear option.
They've definitely moved past idle threats. The discussion within the community, according to the sources, has progressed to actively preparing a coordinated response. And that response involves drafting an open letter and organizing a blackout.
A blackout. What does that mean in this context?
It likely means a coordinated effort by a significant portion of the active user base and potentially key applications to temporarily halt their activity on the Lens network. Stop posting, stop transacting, maybe even temporarily disable app integration.
Why would they do that? Isn't that damaging the platform they want to save?
It's crucial to understand the strategy here. The intent, as described, isn't to destroy Lens. It's designed to inflict temporary calculated pain, to make the silence costly for the leadership. The goal is explicit. Force an official reply and a timeline. They're essentially weaponizing their collective engagement, the very network activity the protocol needs to survive, to force the leadership team to the negotiating table.
So it's a sophisticated protest. using the network's own reliance on activity against the current management to demand accountability.
Exactly. It shows a pretty high degree of organization and strategic thinking within that core community. They want commitment. And if the original team truly is fragmented, if key people are focusing on base or elsewhere, the community recognizes that the keys, the control, needs to be handed over formally to the dedicated builders and users who are still passionate and still want to carry the original vision forward.
Because the silence prevents either outcome.
Right. Silence as a governance strategy denies both possibilities. It prevents a renewed commitment and it blocks a structured handover. It just leaves the protocol twisting in the wind in this state of limbo. And that's why the community feels pushed towards taking such seemingly extreme measures. They feel they have no other leverage left.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and talk about the deeper operational and existential challenges Lens is facing right now, even beyond the communication breakdown. We need to analyze this core audience problem. The sources seem torn. Is it a stable, albeit smaller, community, or is it becoming an active ghost town?
It seems to be in this really fragile, precarious balance right now, probably leaning more towards the ghost town side than anyone would like to admit. Yes, Lens definitely retains this core group of incredibly passionate, dedicated, almost ideological users, the true believers who are still there, still building, still engaging. But the sources are pretty unequivocal. The protocol has profoundly failed to hold on to or attract a broader, more mainstream audience. And look, in any social context, that's a killer. If you don't have a steady flow of active, high-quality creators coming in, if you don't have fresh, interesting content driving discovery and keeping casual users engaged, those network effects just evaporate.
The whole thing relies on that constant churn and growth.
Absolutely. The entire structure of a successful social platform relies on that constant influx of new energy, new users, new content. If that has slowed to just a trickle, as the sources suggest, then the network inevitably contracts towards irrelevance. It ends up being fueled only by that diminishing pool of core believers and perhaps the temporary boost from the GHO rewards.
Which brings us back to the rewards critique. We need to maybe deepen the financial analysis here. Why isn't relying on GHO rewards a sustainable strategy? What are the long-term economic downsides?
The fundamental economic issue is that these rewards incentivize short-term engagement, but also encourage immediate value extraction. Think about the user behavior it promotes. People log in, they perform the minimum necessary actions to qualify for the GHO drop, and then what do they do with the GHO?
Sell it, convert it, take the money and run.
Often, yes. They immediately extract that value or sell the GHO. It becomes pure financial farming. It doesn't build loyalty to the product itself. It does nothing to improve the developer tooling or ecosystem health. And it certainly doesn't solve the core problem of long-term user retention based on genuine utility or enjoyment. People stay for a great product, for a vibrant community, not just for a weekly lottery ticket.
Is there also a risk tied to GHO itself being linked to
There is an external dependency risk there, yes. The health and value proposition of the rewards program becomes partially tied to the health, stability, and governance decisions of an entirely separate protocol, Avrov. It introduces a layer of systemic risk that wouldn't exist with a native protocol token, for example.
Okay, this is fascinating. There's this governance paradox emerging. What Web3 is all about: decentralization, DAOs, community control. But here, the sources suggest the community's push for a DAO right now might actually backfire. Could it hasten the project's decline, given the current state?
That is the fundamental, often glossed over tension in many decentralized systems. Yes, governance structures like DAOs, formal treasury rules, voting mechanisms, they are absolutely essential for achieving that Web3 ideal of community ownership. No question. But a DAO is primarily a political or decision-making structure. It decides what should happen. It requires a dedicated, full-time, highly operational team to actually execute those decisions. Someone has to maintain the servers, manage the centralized indexers that make the data usable, keep the APIs running, respond to critical outages 24/7.
And the fear is that operational team is missing or fragmented at Lens right now.
That's the core fear expressed in the sources. If you push immediately to full DAO control without having that reliable, funded, operational core team in place, the likely outcome isn't efficient decentralization, it's chaos. It's feature paralysis.
How so?
The DAO might be able to vote on, say, changing the color of a button on some theoretical future interface. But without a dependable engineering and operations team ready to implement and deploy that change, the decision remains purely theoretical. Nothing actually happens. Decisions stall, the core infrastructure might decay due to lack of maintenance, and the whole thing risks devolving into just a political debating society instead of a functional, evolving product.
So the community wants decentralization, but the current leadership hasn't built the necessary centralized operational bridge to get there responsibly.
That seems to be the catch-22 they're stuck in. The desire for DAO governance is legitimate, but the operational preconditions might not be met, creating a serious risk if rushed.
And compounding this operational fragility is something the sources flag as a severe concentration risk. Can you explain what that means in the context of Lens?
Yeah, concentration risk here means that the network's overall health and activity isn't spread out nicely across a wide variety of different independent applications and use cases. Instead, the vast majority of the transactions, the active users, is concentrated in the hands of a very small number of large flagship projects.
Maybe just 2 or 3 key apps driving almost everything.
The sources suggested something like that, a handful of projects controlling the overwhelming majority of the meaningful volume.
And why is that so dangerous? It sounds efficient, maybe?
It's incredibly dangerous because it makes the entire network extremely fragile. One source described it as being easy to spook. Think about it. If just 1 or 2 of those dominant high-activity apps decide, you know what, the technical friction here is too much, or the core team's silence is unacceptable, and they decide to migrate maybe base, maybe to Farcaster, maybe somewhere else,
the whole network's activity collapses overnight.
Instantly. Poof. The transaction volume craters, the active user count plummets. This concentration risk dramatically increases the systemic fragility of the entire protocol. It means Lens's fate is essentially hostage to the independent business decisions of a few key third-party builders, rather than being resilient because activity is widely distributed.
And finally, tying back to the talent train we discussed earlier, this creates a very real reputation and migration threat, doesn't it?
Absolutely. When founders, early core team members, key technical staff start publicly shifting their attention, their energy, their positive signaling towards competing protocols, that's the loudest possible signal to the market that the original vision for Lens is either failing or being actively abandoned by its creators.
And that reputational damage has real consequences.
Huge consequences. It makes those messy scenarios we talked about, like an acquisition by a bigger company or a community-led fork of the protocol or just a mass migration of the remaining key projects. It makes those feel like real outcomes, not just distant theoretical possibilities. The market sees the talent leaving, the remaining community sees it, and everyone starts asking the same inevitable question. Okay, if the current team isn't going to commit, who is going to end up holding the keys to this thing?
So given this, well, it sounds like a pretty grim picture. Operational problems, existential threats, community revolt. What does this actually mean for the future?
Our sources sketch out a few likely scenarios based on where things stand. Let's start with the best case, maybe the hardest case. Scenario 1, resurgence via transparency.
This is the path the community is essentially demanding. It's the turn the ship around scenario. But it requires a complete, immediate 180-degree shift in how the leadership operates.
What are the steps? For this recovery to even have a chance, Lens leadership needs to, tomorrow, publish that clear, specific, credible roadmap. Detail the milestones for the next, say, 12 to 18 months. People need to see a plan. Critically, they must hire key, visible roles, especially someone dedicated to community management and social media, SMM, and someone focused on developer relations, DevRel. Make accountability visible.
And the LIP process.
Relaunch the LIP process and crucially attach real financial incentives to it. Get builders excited and rewarded for contributing again. And underpin all of this by rebuilding trust through that consistent weekly communication cadence. Be present, be transparent, be responsive.
And if they do all that?
If they execute on all of that immediately and sincerely, the sources suggest the core community will likely stay. Some developers might be wooed back. And a slow, steady recovery is at least possible. It's a hard path, requires humility and investment, but it's possible.
Okay, now the flip side. What if the current leadership just keeps doing what they're doing, maintains the silence, the sporadic effort? Scenario 2, stagnation and slow drift.
This feels like the default path if nothing changes. It's the death by 1,000 cuts scenario. If the silence continues, the community predicts the key remaining apps will eventually just give up and follow the talent drain elsewhere. Engagement will contract further.
And Lens
just becomes this niche playground, a small corner of Web3 used only by that tiny handful of absolute diehards, maybe the ones still motivated by the GHO rewards. But it loses all relevance in the broader Web3 social conversation. Newer networks, the ones communicating better, offering lower friction, maybe better incentives. They capture all the fresh mindshare, the developer energy, the venture capital, and Lens just fades away, becomes a historical footnote.
Let's look at the more dramatic high-risk outcomes. Scenario 3, acquisition or fork. These sound messy, But the sources suggest they're very possible given the fragility.
Yeah, both of these basically represent an end state for Lens as it was originally conceived and managed. An acquisition means some larger entity steps and maybe a big Web 2 company looking to buy some Web 3 credibility, or maybe a major competitor, like you said, maybe someone backing Farcaster or another network.
What would that mean?
Well, it would likely stabilize the funding. It might guarantee the protocol's technical survival in some form, but it almost certainly destroys the original Web3 dream of community ownership and genuine decentralization. The code base might live on, but the soul of the project, the reason many people believed in it, would likely be gone. The assets survive, the original vision dies.
And the fork, that's the ultimate act of decentralized defiance, isn't it?
It is. It's the community saying, fine, if you won't run it properly, we'll take it and do it ourselves. It involves copying the open source code base, potentially figuring out how to migrate key data like profiles and relationships, and then launching a new version of Lens, probably on a different chain, completely independent of the original team.
Sounds powerful, but risky.
Immensely risky. While it keeps that decentralized dream alive and puts control directly in the hands of the motivated community members, the coordination required is massive. Who actually manages the new treasury? Who holds the final admin keys, if any? Which chain do they even choose to fork to? There are huge political, legal, and technical hurdles, but because the code is open source and the community is organized and feels abandoned, it's a very real threat on the table.
Okay, and the final scenario, scenario 4, which feels closely tied to the current situation, the pivot to rewards only.
Right. This is the scenario where Lens doesn't exactly die, but it fundamentally changes its nature. It effectively ceases trying to be a product-first destination, a place you go for great social experiences or cutting-edge apps, and instead becomes primarily a rewards-first destination.
So the GHO farming becomes the main event.
Exactly. The token mechanics, the weekly drops, become the primary driver of activity, completely divorced from the actual quality of the underlying product or the innovation happening or not happening in the ecosystem.
What's the danger there? It might look okay on paper, right? Transactions happening.
It might boost short-term metrics like transaction volume or daily active wallets, which can look good superficially, but it completely hollows out the value proposition. Users are only there for the financial incentive. As soon as that reward pool shrinks or a more lucrative farming opportunity pops up somewhere else, they're gone in a flash. It creates this constant pump and dump cycle of activity driven by mercenary capital and ensures that any long-term sustainable network value just falls off a cliff. It's a sugar high, not real growth.
So when you boil down this whole crisis, all the demands, all the potential futures, it really comes down to one single, unavoidable question the community is forcing the Lens leadership to answer. The sources frame it as the commitment.
It's binary, it's blunt, and the community, based on these sources, has been crystal clear about it. The question is simply, are you, the original leadership, committed to running Lens properly or not?
And they need more than just words.
Absolutely. They demand clear, visible action. If the team truly intends to double down, to recommit, then they need to show the plan, publish the roadmap, make the hires, fund the initiatives immediately, prove it. Conversely, if they are distracted, if their focus is shifted to base or other ventures, then they need to stop pretending, stop the silence, and announce a clear, structured path to handing over control to the community via a functional DAO.
And the community is saying either path is okay.
The sources emphasize that either outcome renewed, visible commitment, or R, a structured, transparent transition, is actually acceptable to the core community at this point. What is not acceptable, what is now viewed as actively harmful and potentially malicious, is the continued silence, the limbo state.
If you had to synthesize the overall feeling, the sentiment coming from these community sources, how would you describe it? One piece called it the bros take. What was the vibe?
The vibe described was overwhelmingly very bearish and very sad. And you really have to acknowledge the sense of heartbreak that comes through. Lens wasn't just another crypto project hopping on a trend. For many, it was seen as this rare, beautiful experiment. A genuine shot at achieving true user ownership in social media, fixing the problems of Web 2.
A real ideological bet.
Exactly. So watching a project with that kind of ambition, that kind of ideological purity, seemingly fray and potentially fail due to what looks like basic organizational issues, silence, fragmentation, lack of focus, it's genuinely heartbreaking for the people who poured their time, their reputation, their belief into that original vision. There's real sadness there.
But there's a counterpoint to that bearishness, isn't there?
Yeah.
A source of resilience.
There absolutely is. And it's the realization that the community itself is the real lasting asset here, perhaps even more so than the code base. Well, while some high-profile people have clearly left or shifted focus, The sources emphasize that many brilliant creators, dedicated developers, and incredibly determined organizers are still there. They're described as being loud, resourceful, and relentless. Meaning that even if Lens Protocol as a specific product run by the original team were to fail, this community is so robust, so organized, so ideologically motivated that it would almost certainly carry the lessons, the core members, and potentially even the forkable code base somewhere else. The community itself acts as an insurance policy for the ideals, if not for this specific corporate entity.
There's still hope if the team acts.
If the team manages to, as one source put it, wake up and choose transparency, there's a clear, immediate path back towards relevance powered by this passionate community. But you have to say, the balance of evidence, the current trajectory, has the core believers deeply frustrated, highly suspicious, and actively preparing for alternatives.
Okay, so let's end by recapping those non-negotiable asks one last time. The final 5-point plan for survival that the community seems to be coalescing around, the demands likely to be in that open letter.
Right. It's basically the minimum viable path to rebuilding trust. First, publish a comprehensive, honest roadmap. Show the plan.
Second,
Publish a transparent treasury plan. Show the money. Show the accountability.
third,
Hire a dedicated, visible communications and developer relations team now. Show the faces. Show the commitment to engagement.
fourth,
Separate the builder rewards from the general user rewards. Show you value infrastructure and sustainable growth, not just engagement farming.
and finally, the fifth.
Commit to a public weekly cadence of updates and communication. Show up consistently. The core message underneath all 5 is simple. If you, the original architects, are no longer willing or able to run Lens effectively, then you have a duty to hand it over to those who are.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty provocative thought to carry forward. It really builds on this tension that the Lens situation is defining right now. Here we have a protocol that was explicitly designed, marketed, and believed in as being user-owned, decentralized. Yet the core development team, the initial stewards, seem by all accounts to have failed in what many would consider a basic fiduciary duty, the duty of operational transparency, of consistent communication with their stakeholders, the community. So when we talk about decentralized governance, where exactly is that line? Where does the founding team's responsibility to be transparent end, and the community's inherent sovereign right to effectively seize control, to organize, to fork the protocol, and take it forward themselves begin? That's the fundamental high-stakes tension Lens is forcing us all to confront right now. And the answer, whatever it turns out to be, could define a lot about the future of genuinely decentralized social media. We'll leave you to mull that one over.